That may be the most awesome intro I've ever had anywhere. Thank you. And thanks everybody for coming out, and thanks to Valparaiso University for having this event, putting the series on. I think it's great. Hopefully, is this thing on? Is it working for you? I'm a low talker, so if you need to, just give me one of these. That's the thumb, and I will speak up. And then, of course, this thing stopped working right at the time I'd use it. Okay, so hey, we'll get into this. It's a small group, so if you want to say anything, just raise your hand, jump out, ask a question, stop me at any time. Let's do this. It's a conversation, and I want to make sure it's valuable for you as much as it is for me hanging out and having people hear my stories. So, I'll tell you a little bit about civic networking, some of the things we learned in the campaign, some of the things we're doing in public good, and how that related to sort of online giving, what it means to give, that kind of thing. This thing just isn't going to work, so I'm going to stand over here by the podium. So that's me, Jason Kunesh. Most people mispronounce it, so there's a mnemonic for you. But I'm there at Public Good. If you have any questions about this afterwards, I'm on Twitter at @JDKunesh or just jason@publicgood.com. Feel free to reach out and say hi. A little bit about me. That's actually not me, the guy who has D pants there. But I was actually adopted out of St. Vincent's there at 721 LaSalle, so way back in the day. And I was taken in by these two lovely people, my folks. It's my mom and dad right there, along with my sister. And they had originally been, they were living in Chicago at the time, but they were originally from a small town called Marinette. So my dad was the captain of the football team, and my mom was the homecoming queen. And in the only recorded time in history, they weren't complete jerks. They were actually nice people. And they moved us back to the hometown in Marinette after we'd spent some time down in the city. And, you know, Marinette's a really weird place. It's right in the 45th parallel. Our house was actually right in the blue line there that is the 45th parallel. And there wasn't really, let me just go ahead, come on. Slides, don't fail me now. Who knows? There we go, sorry. That's what my backyard looked like in the winter, okay? So we spent a lot of time on these, right? Basically working on computers when they first came out, trying to figure out how this stuff works. And I had, you know, a pretty decent career. You know, as Elizabeth mentioned, worked at places like Orbitz and helped create that, and Groupon, and Threadless, and a whole bunch of places like that. And mostly my background is what they call user experience. So for those of you who don't know, the kind of joke in user experience is the big pie chart there says diplomacy and consensus. And the little thing is like actual work, right? Because mostly what I do is I listen to people and how they struggle with technology or doing whatever it is they're trying to do, and I make that easier for them, right? And ideally I do that in a way that also makes them happy. So I was living that life, and things were awesome, and we were about to have our second child, and my wife gave birth to her about 3 months early, and so she spent all that time in the hospital. The next couple of months. And one time, I got a call while I was at home. Hey, if somebody doesn't fax this form in by 5 o'clock on Friday, you'd misfilled out this form in the emergency room. If you don't fill it out by 5 o'clock on Friday, you will be liable for the entire insurance bill, which at this point was over $500,000. Right? It would have busted us. And this was at 4:30 on a Friday. So I flip out. I call my wife, and one of us was always at the hospital, and it happened to be her, and she was there, frantic. She tells the lady at the hospital, and she's like, "Oh yeah, we get these all the time." What? Oh yeah, trust me. Gets a social worker, gets the right doctor, gets the right signature on the right form. Suddenly we're not broke. Right? So why did that happen? You know, we had insurance, we had all the right things, we were playing by the rules, and this is going on the whole time. People are talking about death camps or all this crazy stuff about the ACA, what's actually going to happen with our insurance system and all this. So things are fine. Vivian comes home, it's her now, complete with the flamingo glasses. And my mom and my sis came down and helped out at that time. And soon thereafter, Vivian's walking, and things are good. And my mom passed away really suddenly. And I wrote up her obituary, and we did a celebration of life for her, And about a tenth of the town showed up. She was just an antique dealer and a painter, but she was a lot more than that. Right? She was a community gardener. She volunteered at the animal shelter. She helped teach people how to read. She had all these other aspects of her life, her associational life. And it kind of came out at the end of that, you know. So I saw that, and I really wondered, like, well, what's going to be in mine? Is it going to be, hey, I got you cheaper airplane tickets, and I got you, you know, a better deal for your spa? This is crazy, right? So about that time, I got called up by a local startup. Can you come in and do kind of a design 101 for us, right? Sort of, you know, tell us why design is important for people in the venture community, blah, blah, blah. So I go in, and actually it was the Obama campaign, and the pitch was really different than what I've been led to believe. The pitch was, we're actually going to lose this election if it just comes down to money, right? If it comes down to money, the other side will buy a bunch of TV ads. We won't be able to keep up with that. The only thing that we can do is actually use technology to help make volunteers more efficient and also more effective with their time. And if we do that, if we use technology to reach out to people and get our message out there, thank you, then we're going to do a lot better in terms of the result of this election. So do you want to come aboard and do this? Now, the day that they actually invited us in was also the day in which they told us, the New York Times basically said the president was unelectable or unre-electable. So I went home, told my wife, hey, I've got a great idea. I'm going to take a 70% pay cut and work on this thing that seems doomed. And of course, she was like, okay, it's not the worst thing you've come home and said. So go ahead, right? So we went out, and it was a pretty tall task, right? So I'll give you a kind of a sense of the magnitude really quickly. It's 540 days, about 18 months, all 50 states, 1,000 field offices. We have 10,000 neighborhood team leaders, so then 10,000 neighborhood teams that coordinated over 2 million volunteer shifts, 2.2 million voters registered, raised about $700 million online, 1.1 billion overall, and created about 150 million phone calls. And supporting all that, the stuff that I worked on directly was about 200 applications. So little web programs, some things of mobile apps, stuff like that, some things more complex, databases or things like that, right? But all kind of tied together. And really, more than the technology or more than the metrics, the thing that held us together was the actual mission, right? So this was our statement. This was the guiding force for our entire community. The idea was that if you did these 4 things, you did the 3 things, you would get the 4th one, right? If you respected people when they showed up, if you empowered them to help you out, and you inspired them to make change, then we'd win the election. It was just that simple. So just really quickly, what are those things that we need to do? It's basically 5 things that you care about in a presidential campaign. Register people to vote, persuade them that you have the right person to vote for, turn those people out to vote, get some volunteers to help do the first 3 things, and then have somebody else give you money to fund the whole thing, right? And a lot of that, when we showed up, looked like this, right? So it was, you know, basically big signs on walls, lots of paper, right? And, you know, a lot of folks, when we first showed up, there's all these technology people showing up from Google and Craigslist or wherever else, and they're all sort of laughing, right? Like, look at how basic this is. And we had to show people right away, wait a minute, everybody's work has value, right? This is the thing that you learn from a field office that we had to teach all the tech people coming in. Wait a minute, no matter whether you're the person who's cleaning the trash, you're like emptying the trash bins, or you're the person who's running the whole office, it doesn't matter, right? I mean, leadership starts from the ability to do any one of these jobs and do it well without complaining. And so everyone's job when somebody new comes in is to help that person get oriented and figure out what's the highest value thing they can do. Right? It's not to denigrate them for what they don't have, it's to raise them up for what they can do. And we learned a lot of this stuff from this guy. So I wanted to name check him. This is Marshall Gans. I don't know if people are familiar with him, but he's a community organizer that actually kind of wrote the playbook that was used both in 2008 and 2012 for the Obama for America team. And basically what that playbook says is that you start out with what I did, which is called Story of Self. Right? You share a little bit about how you came to be interested in a life of service in whatever way, shape, or form. And then the other person tells the story of us. Right? Okay, you know why I'm here. You tell me why you're here. Right? In between those 2 things, we find commonality. What are the things we care about as a community? Because now we know each other's story. We're part of a community. Right? And then finally, we figure out the story of now. Right? What can we do together to actually move our community forward? Now that we have a community, now that we know that we care about these things, what are we going to do about it? How can we make change, right? So that's what's behind a lot of the Marshall Gannon's philosophy. And what we tried to do was take that online as much as we could. So, here you've got two First Americans. The lady on the right actually lives on a reservation. She doesn't have a phone. She doesn't have a computer. They don't have power. But we need to find a way to get her involved in that field office in a way that she can be productive. So what can she do without these things? What can she do in a way to help us out? This fella here is in a field office, actually this is up in Milwaukee, and he has a terrible job. So typically, if you didn't have all those electronic things, you would go out and you'd have a paper-based field office, and there'd be somebody back in that field office who would then take all that stuff that was written on paper, and at the end of the night, they would put it all into a computer, right? And it's kind of terrible. We also knew these people had these things called neighborhood teams, and that they were representing them, right? They understood, this is called the snowflake model of organizing for us. So the idea in the snowflake is that there's sort of somebody here in the middle, and then you fill out the different team roles. So we had real team roles like phone bank captain, canvas captain, volunteer coordinator, data captain, the guy pounding all the stuff at the computer, data captain, right? But because it's an organization and it should be built from the ground up, right? Even though headquarters wanted very much to say this is the rule book and this is how things work, in the field, hey, this is associational life. This is our neighborhood team, right? So we're going to make it our neighborhood team. So we're going to have roles like phone banker extraordinaire Patricia, right? Or super volunteer Mike. I met a ton of comfort captains. I can tell you pretty much with a high degree of confidence, speaking statistically, a comfort captain is a lady 55 plus. She's an empty nester. She probably volunteers at her church, and she makes some of the best baked goods you've ever tasted. Right? Because typically the lady who was the comfort captain showed up on Sunday afternoons and just kept everybody going, you know? And again, that's fine, because everybody's work has value. And a lot of times what you saw was they were mapping this stuff out again. They mapped out the team, now they're mapping out where their teams are in the neighborhood. And again, they're doing it all with paper on walls. Right? So they brought us in to try to take a look at all these commercial products that were out there. This is a group out in New Mexico. And here they are just using Facebook, right? They're just using Facebook to organize their events, to organize their community, to get their message out. They're doing everything. They're not using the tools that the campaign is building. They're like, forget about it. Like we're already off and running, you know? And there was a reason for that. The reason was that the campaign technology looked terrible. This is what it looked like the day we showed up. That's the drawing I'm trying to make of the way all these things interrelate together. And that's what we wanted to make it look like. So that was basically, if you had to sum up what our job was, it was take that rat's nest and make it simple. Right? And that's why we were doing it. So the thing to kind of take away from that first kind of bunch of images is we were trying to figure out there's all these ways in which people are actually organizing online and offline. And we want to make sure that they're doing it in a way that's actually effective for the goals that we all have as a community. In this case, winning an election. But what wasn't clear was that whether we could actually do it in a way that really could make sense and be done, right? Could we get people to do stuff online that they had never done before? More than just giving money, could we actually get people to be community activists? And you know, the stakes were pretty high. Kate actually sent to us at the campaign. We communicated a lot with Kate. It came 3 days before the election. The only person bold enough to cut it was Eric Schmidt, who was the chairman of Google. He didn't care. He had some Kate. And, you know, basically at the end of it, it worked out. We won. That's my daughter shaking the hand of the president. And you know, I kind of shared my story with you up front here. I'll tell you, the crazy thing that I learned is that every single person in that picture has a crazier story than the one I told you. You know, it's like I never went to school thinking as an English major I was going to end up working on a presidential campaign. You know, I just had the right friends, I guess, basically, or I did the right work along the way of like day by day just cranking it out and doing good stuff. But you never know where it's going to take you, and it's true of most of the people in that picture. And it wasn't always easy. Oh, God, no. Who made these transitions? This is where being CEO stinks sometimes. Now it's mine. I just own this. Cool. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of quotes, and then we can actually get into Q&A. Here we go. So this is the big one. I love this. I have no clue who David Milne is, but this is absolutely right. The idea that design's a behavior, right? All this stuff is designed. So when we start talking about civic organizing and really community engagement, I think just a couple of points to make here. Number one, we always talk a lot with nonprofits. We've worked with over 1,000 now, and consistently we'll hear the same thing from them, which is how do you get highly engaged people, right? How do you get people to be highly engaged with our organization? And I think that that's a fail, right? Because ultimately, when you turn the question around and you ask a nonprofit, what does a highly engaged person look like? Right? How would they change their behavior based on being highly engaged? Oftentimes they can't tell you. Right? Now at the campaign, we actually had a thing we called the matrix of engagement. So it was actually just a fancy way of saying spreadsheet, okay? But the idea was that you had basically categories of stuff. Right? Here's fundraising, here's volunteerism, here's registering to vote, here's building awareness, here's whatever kind of orientation that we have for our programs, right? What are the things we want people to do? What are the buckets we want to ask them about doing stuff in? Okay, once you have that, from low to high, you have what are the different things they can do? So, a real simple example. For fundraising. Okay, so the most easiest thing you could do is maybe give $2, right? The highest level thing might be to make your own fundraiser. So we list all the different things in there. Make your own fundraising page, you know, do a recurring donation, whatever. And then you just kind of optimize it. You measure how many people are doing those things, right? And you see how fast and in what order they're doing them. And start to figure stuff out. So I'll give you an example we used earlier today. You know, one of the things we did in the website was we'd ask you for your email address and your zip code. And now from that, we'd have enough information to put you on a neighborhood team. Okay? Now that's a really big step. If you think about it, you just gave a little bit of information to sign up on a screen. And the next thing we're going to ask you to do is go out for coffee with a field organizer. Well, that's real stuff, right? Like I have to get up off my couch and put on pants and meet somebody, and, right? Like I don't know if I'm ready for this, right? So it's such a, what can we do in between there, right? And so like one thing in between was, well, let's just show them the profile in the system of the person that they're going to meet. So now you're not meeting some stranger, right? I'm meeting somebody I know, and I know a little bit about them and what motivated them. Right? Okay, well now, what am I going to say when I'm sitting there? Okay, so the next thing we asked you was, hey, instead of just showing up, why don't you review these pages with different causes about the campaign? The campaign works on, you know, veterans issues, LGBT, etc. Review a couple, tell us the ones you care about. So now when you go to the conversation, you know who you're meeting and you have something to say, right? So by doing that, we were able to reduce the flake rate. In other words, how many people didn't show up. And it was consistently by figuring out, again, we had a matrix, what's important for us as an organization, what's important for people to sign up, it's important for them to come to these one-on-one meetings, it's important for them to come to a volunteer shift. And that was the order we knew they had to come in. So then, given that those are the things, what are the things we can do to break down those barriers? Right? And what can we learn from it? Because ultimately, it is about community, and it's about the community driving the agenda as much as the individual nonprofit. The nonprofit might know a lot about outcomes and how to produce results and what works and what doesn't, and that's awesome. But they need to be able to share that knowledge with people in a way that they can all agree this is a good route for the community going forward, and kind of break down some of those barriers and let them own that plan as well. So that's that. As long as you're going to leave me on the stage, I'll keep getting these things up. You guys know Chuck Close? Right? He's like a photorealistic painter, right? This saying amazes me. So, you know, inspirations for amateurs, the rest of us just show up and get to work. Yeah, he's physically disabled. He actually had suffered, I believe it was a stroke, and he figured out a way to paint anyway, right? Even though he barely can move his hands, right? Dude is still making amazing images, right? And he had to figure out how to change his method and do everything else. So it's like at the end of the day, making sure you're getting up and doing it instead of waiting for inspiration to strike. Maybe it's more for the design people in the room because we sit there and say, you know, I need inspiration. But what we really mean is I need to finish watching whatever and then I'll get up off the couch. So give agency. This is a big one, right? A lot of times, and I think you see this, again, in particular in nonprofit or sort of community-driven organizations where there's a fear of innovation, right? There's a fear of failure. You know there's a budget or there's grantors that you're relying upon. And we said this is the plan and we're going to execute the plan, so you kind of stay very focused on that, which is good. But the more that you can give agency to people, especially within the community or even within the people that you're serving, the more that you can involve and engage and break down those barriers, just the better it is. The healthier the organization, you're working on the right stuff. At the same time, we always focus on this at Public Good in particular, being measurable. I know it's a big focus for nonprofits too, is we always try to prove an outcome, stuff like that. But it's good. If you can't measure it, then you can't really know it, and then you have endless debates, right? But if you can find any measurement, so for example, we were talking earlier today, and there's kind of a question about, well, if we do this crowdfunding thing with this program, is that going to impact this program? I don't know, right? It may. It's hard to tell. But if we actually start to measure a couple different things, what would be a successful crowdfunding program? What do we expect the kind of general program to do? Okay, well, if we run this thing, let's just run it and see what happens. Okay, if it does do it, then we'll know, right? And we can cancel this program or double down on it or whatever. But if you have the measurement, it takes kind of the heat and the emotion out of the conversation and allows you to say, hey, we agreed, 10 of these is success. We got 12, that's success, right? It's simple. It takes some of the back and forth out. For us too, generally, we have a lot of impact on being meaningful. So, for example, we put the stat up there, hey, $700 million raised online, right? That's a meaningful stat. I could have put the stat up there, we served 7.7 billion web pages. Does that matter? Who knows? It doesn't matter. I mean, who knows what that means? Did anybody do anything because they went to those web pages? Right? That matters, right? So you might measure it, but if it doesn't mean anything, who cares, right? Measure the thing that actually makes sense. We're also big believers in transparency, so even internally within Public Good, our team knows the state of just about anything at any point in time. Salaries, all that kind of stuff, we're completely transparent about. It's hard. There are times that gets really annoying, but it's also really easy. We're talking before about trust. I think trust is built through that kind of transparency, and then it leads to speed. So you might end up having some really uncomfortable conversations, or there's times that you end up having conversations about stuff like, for example, for us, we were raising a Series A round a while ago. And so each time you're like, well, the investors, people want to know how'd that investor meeting go? And they all go about the same until somebody hands you a giant check, right? And so you share that with the team, and they're like, well, is that good or bad? I really don't know, right? I won't know until they hand us a giant check, And so on the one hand, it's like there's a lot of uncertainty, and you're having these conversations that might be longer than you want them to be. On the other hand, they know exactly what's up, right? And so then when it comes down to harder conversations or more difficult things, or things where you've got to move quickly, it's easy for us to do it. We all trust each other. Finally, just being accountable, right? If you're going to put all that stuff out there, like people in general talk about how they love, as employees, we love all this stuff. You're giving us agency. You're telling us to be transparent. We can take risks. Awesome. We're going to measure it. We're going to make sure you're accountable. It's not about us just screwing around, right? It's about us actually accomplishing the change we want to see. So it's really basic. And finally, right, it's encouraging dissent. If everybody in the meeting just nods, you didn't need that meeting, right? You all could have been about your day, right? You could have had lunch, But so you need to be able to make sure people feel good about speaking up. And if they don't speak up, then yeah, you need to get out of there and get about your day. And then, finally, being happy, right? I mean, I think it's easier for us at purpose-driven organizations to say that. but you know, even in the days when things go up and down, and for us in the startup world or in the campaign, you know, we used to call it being in the barrel, you know, because at some point you're going to have your turn in the barrel. And those values we talked about in the beginning, again, you know, respect, empowerment, inclusion, those are the things that are going to determine whether you get out of that thing successfully or not, right? It's going to be your values and all the kind of the culture you've built, right? All the stuff about transparency and accountability and agency, and all the ability for you to really bring in the community into the decision-making process. That's the stuff that when things get really upside down on you, all that stuff pays off. You can move quickly. You have an organization built on trust. You know what your values are, so then when it comes time to making decisions, it's not a big ethical thing. It's like, oh, well, clearly this is the thing to do because this is aligned to our values and it gets us to where we want to go. So, you know, at the end of the day with all that stuff, just being happy and making sure you're kind of bringing that attitude. And even, you know, I have so many war stories about people losing it. We had actually one guy on the phone. Remember when Bill Clinton gave that really long spiel at the DNC last time around, last cycle? All of our servers went down during that talk. And we literally had a guy on the phone from Amazon, and his only job was to tell us, I'm here every 60 seconds, because we thought he actually was having a coronary event. And I'm not kidding. Like, we literally were like, you need to tell us you're breathing. And he did, and we brought the servers all back up, and everything worked fine. But it was one of those moments where if you don't have some trust, if you don't have somebody just kind of being like, hey, it's okay. At the end of the day, we'll all still get through this. You know, things can go into a downward spiral quickly. So anywho, that's my spiel. Just want to wrap it up and just give you some chance to talk. Let's have a little conversation. It's a pretty small room. So yeah, what's going on? And thank you. Yes, sir.
I actually have two questions, and the first is shamelessly selfish because I'm an English professor. So my first one is a little bit more personal. Okay. What was your first job after you graduated?
Oh wow, my first job after I graduated was at Commerce Clearinghouse, and I edited legislation, which I later learned meant that I was writing summaries for lobbyists.
And you learned that? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really helpful because, of course, one of the things that I'm constantly talking with my colleagues about, my students about, is how you make that first step out of school.
Yeah.
My second question has more to do with the nonprofit sector and how you move from sort of like, oh great, I want to get online, Jason, and how you tie that to mission. So when you were involved in the campaign, the standard was pretty clear: victory. Right? Like, what is our desired outcome? What's motivating us? Victory. For other agencies where it's sort of just a day-to-day grind, you're never going. I mean, I just came from a board meeting straight here. We are never going to solve, you know, people going to prison. Like, we're not going to solve that problem. So how do you work with agencies to determine a metric that they're going to use if they're going to sort of work to move online, and sort of what's measurable?
Sure, that's a great question, and thanks for your service too. That's awesome. Yeah, so I think, I mean, a lot of times it should come ideally from the programs or the outcomes themselves. And I don't want to go, I mean, there's obviously a huge realm of that, right, with the foundation-oriented sort of side of the nonprofits. I mean, to me, I think the thing is thinking less about the tools and more about the goals. So this was a conversation I think we had before about, like, you give people, oh, we should be on Facebook. Oh, really? Because I can tell you right now that the majority of people don't donate money through Facebook. Right? One of the things that we saw from the campaign that was really telling for us, and one of the places we were really wrong, is that we thought people were going to be really prolific sharers, and they were, once they gave money. We thought, oh, well, they'll definitely share first, then they'll give cash, because they'll do this really low-level thing, and then they'll jump in. People, once they were in, they're like, hey, I already gave money. I'll share this thing, right? Because I'm invested, you know. And so one of the things we learned was that early on, if you had joined but not given, our success metric was actually that you went out and watched videos. So we didn't care if you shared them. It was nice if you did. We cared more that you saw them, right? Just so that we knew you were getting educated about what was going on. And so I think for a lot of times with this engagement stuff, those are the questions I would have. Like, what would be the things that people would do on a really discrete basis? Like, is it learning more about incarceration? Is it learning more about the lack of opportunity for ex-offenders? Or what are sort of the things? And then once they have that, like the other part with the whole idea of a matrix, is like, how do you kind of, we call it daisy chain, if you remember like what a daisy chain is, right? How do you daisy chain? So in other words, everything, you never said thank you, you said thank you and, right? So thank you for that donation. And did you see you can join this Facebook group? Oh, you joined the Facebook group? Awesome, thank you. And did you see there's a Twitter, right? And just kind of continuing. Was it helpful?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, thank you.
Sure.
And
right? Yes.
So with like the 24-hour news cycle and the fast-paced nature of social media, how do you get people to take the time to like understand or realize the community? Because that seems to be like this like driving force. So how do you deal with that tension?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I have no clue. No, I think we're starting to try to figure it out. Like really, you know, in 2015 we built all these tools, and we thought, well, the nonprofits will build community, and they'll figure it out. And what we really realized as we started to scale this was that this wasn't true, right? That we need to start building community ourselves, and so we're starting to do more of that now. But I think, I mean, there's an enormous gap. I mean, you know, I'm a big Robert Putnam fan. And so first of all, let's just apologize to the entire millennial generation. We drove this thing off the rails, so you guys, sorry. We're trying to give you the tools to help you deal with it, but it's kind of messed up. You know, and I think, I say that, and I'm joking when I say it, but it's also very true. And I think there's a lot about civic and associational life that are broken, and that I don't think people have recovered quite yet. And I honestly don't know in particular if the internet is actually the place to have that happen anyway, you know. Like I think there's really enormous power, and you know, I've been touched by, there's been a lot of people I've met time to time, you know. We built like a lot of accessibility and other tools into our stuff. So you'll see somebody, you know, I've met a lot of wheelchair accessible people who are like, hey, because of you I was able to participate. And that's awesome, right? And that's something that wouldn't have been able to happen in the real world because of physical limitations, getting to a field office or doing things like that. But for the most part, the rest of us, everybody else, should kind of be able to get out there more often and have the old kind of bonds of associational life that have gone away, right? And so there are some things out there, like Nextdoor, if you know Nextdoor, that website, you may want to check it out. Nextdoor is like, it's like a, they're sort of trying to create community groups online that support real physical communities. But I still think there's a lot of work to be done. And I think there's a lot of back and forth. I mean, ultimately for us, what we think is that as we get to scale on the community side, more and more what we're trying to become is not a place where people sort of shop for solutions from the nonprofit sphere. But as we go into 2017, we're going to build more and more conversational tools with the idea of like, hey, you read a news article and you care about whatever, gun violence in Chicago, what do you think should be done? And just start a conversation between nonprofits and people, and not have it be about directly, hey, here's money, here's volunteer experience, but just start the conversation. Right? That's our hope at least, but I still think there's a lot of work and a lot of potential there. Good question. Yes?
If you could give one piece of advice to young voters during this election cycle, what would it be?
Oh, wow. Well, I'm really biased. If I give one piece of advice, well, you know, I mean, well, first of all, vote your own self-interest, right? So figure out what the issues are that matter to you and your community. And then secondly, you know, I think really understand, you know, what the different candidates stand for, and then go with your gut and judge, you know, who do you think is actually most likely to accomplish the things that they're saying they're going to do. It's as nonpartisan as I can be. Yes, sir?
Jason, does any of your work with your class take you into the area of anything like civic apps or the kind of work that Code for America does?
So that's a great question. Not in my day job. but on the night job, I'm friends with Jen Palka and a lot of the Code for America folks. So we've helped them set up a lot of their civic usability testing. And we also did that with Smart Chicago. So they were a collaborative out of the Chicago Community Trust. So we helped them as well. So again, it's one of those things where like, because these techniques are becoming really mainstream, in the same way I think, Elizabeth, you've been sort of distributing out the framework you guys were working on and really getting people to activate and stuff, We basically made a community user testing group, and we would pay people at libraries $5. Right? They're already on a computer. They will pay you $5 to take a look at this app. You use it to whatever, pay a parking ticket or apply for food stamps or things like that. So we've touched on it there. Is there something in particular you do with Civic Tech, or?
No, but I'll throw out another question.
Yeah.
You've heard, I'm sure, about the idea that we should be creating smart cities.
Yes, yeah.
I'd like to know your opinion on that debate.
Well,
What is the debate?
yeah, well, no, it's real interesting, right? 'Cause, we're all going to move to cities, right? Supposedly, and the environmental impact is going to be far better if we have these smart cities. And so, full disclosure, John Tolva was former CTO of City of Chicago. He's on our board at Public Good, and I look at it. I guess I think it should happen. I think the question that I have, and the question I have even with like Public Good, is who should be making it, right? So right now, Google has a spinoff called Sidewalk Labs, right? And they kind of come out of Mayor Bloomberg's group in New York, former Mayor Bloomberg, right? He had his kind of all these sort of financial ad tech kind of analytic type people, right? They put in civic roles within government. And they did a lot of good work in New York to kind of make things happen. But now they're taking a lot of that same stuff and they're kind of making a startup from it. And like the question I have is like, okay, great. What happens when Google or Sidewalk Labs controls all the available parking in all major American cities? Like that seems like something that would have been a public good, right? In Chicago, we sold all our parking meters to a private company, which still amazes me that that can be done, but okay. So like when we did Public Good, we're a benefit corporation, right? So we're mission driven as well as being profit driven. So it's built sort of right into the articles of incorporation. And for us, it was this decision of like, well, if we become nonprofits, we probably can't hire the world's best and brightest because, like the campaign, we'll take a giant pay cut for 18 months, but then, you get out and you do something else, right? We didn't see that technologists could do that, so we saw the same pattern over and over of, hey, I spent 2 years of a life in service working at this nonprofit. Now I want to go get married or I want to start a family or something else. I'm going to go work for Google and make a gazillion dollars, right? And so I worry more about the model and about who's funding the innovation and that the innovation is owned by everybody and that we have equal access. A lot of people still don't have smartphones. A lot of people, still need to have access to the stuff that our tax dollars pay for. Yeah, other questions? Yes, sir.
Going back to the user interface element, what role do you see design playing going into the future as, especially in large firms, it's increasingly easy to just iterate through tests of how effective certain buttons, certain colors, certain phrases are within interface? Where is the sort of nuance and skill in design going if we can just create 500 different options, send them out to a test group of 500 million Facebook users, right, and then collect data back and just decide all our design solutions through sort of analytics?
Yeah, no, this is a good question. So, yeah, I don't even know the answer. No, but it's true, right? Because there used to be a time. So I'm an old fart. I've been doing this for a long time, and I have a lot of friends who, my buddy Trammell, who's out of Twitter, he did that redesign back in the day that kind of turned him around. He hates this data-driven optimization world. He's like, basically, burn it down, I'm out. He went to 18F, he's doing government stuff to make it easier for veterans to connect to benefits. Bless his heart. I still think, I think design is two things, right? The first thing is like getting the right thing, and then the second thing is building that thing right, And so for me, getting the right thing is the hard part, right? let's actually go talk to people, and let's actually have the big leap of faith or the big idea, you know, and that's really the focus part, right? Can you get that right? Uber, right? We think it'd be really cool to make it a different way for people to get cars, right, or whatever that thing is. Then I think that second part, getting the design right, then you can optimize all you want, figure out your button color, or whatever other thing you want to do, you know. And you need both, because if you only have the one, the saying in the industry is you optimize to the tops of really small hills, right? There's a mountain right next door, but you never got there because you never thought to look. You just kept optimizing your way up this little thing. So you need both. I guess the short answer, long. Yes, sir.
I'm from computer science, so between the two of us, we've got this.
Right on.
Was there anything in the campaign work for public good software that software hasn't fixed? I mean, it can't usually, I don't think, bake a cake.
Oh gosh, yeah, not quite yet.
Yeah.
So we ran, in 2012, we ran up against some very hard limits of physical computing. So on the election day, we had all the available capacity of Amazon Web Service Cloud. Yeah, it was crazy. We made a mistake and didn't turn down the server bill fast enough. And like, after the election, nobody turned it down. We all were like, woo, we won. Like, what's this bill? It's like $80,000 an hour or something. Oh, turn that off. Turn all that off. I don't need any of that. Nobody's coming back. So we definitely hit that. We got told at one point, so that the thing with just the box with the things coming off it was a big data store, right? So we actually hit the limits of a lot of that stuff. So we had a lot of people tell us, like, by the way, about 2 months before the election, all your shit's gonna fail. Sorry. Peace out, right? And we're like, thanks. Can you come and help us? We were able to fix it, but it was definitely, I think most of the stuff that we built during the election, I don't know that it would have lasted another 6 months, simply because the rate of scale that we were starting to hit. There's a drawing out there I can send you. It's the actual Amazon Web Services
That would be great.
piece. Yeah, it's nuts, and we had data on 130 million people, and then because we had the Facebook graph, which they allowed you to access at that point, we had data on everybody's friends, right? And so it was a massive amount of data, and we used Python, so all the stuff, it was not very scalable, right? Yeah, so with this thing, we're all using Go. So it's been phenomenal. Like the highest load we saw was about $90,000 a minute going through the system, something like that, and it took up 4% of our boxes. So we didn't even have to scale up. We're just like, oh, we probably built that a little too much, which is nice, you know. Yeah, sorry, it's a lot of nerd talk, but I could do it all night. Yeah, well, anybody else?
Yeah, I'm afraid we're sort of at time, although I know, knowing you as the world's nicest person, that you will be around and able to talk with us a little more. But I just want to say that if the Institute for Leadership and Service had a matrix of engagement, one of the items would be having each person who's in this room show up. And another item would be having you sign up for our newsletter in the back. And what?
Still on paper.
Still on paper. No, but it's good. Paper is good,
Paper's
right?
good.
Yeah.
Paper's good.
And a third would be having absolutely phenomenal people like Jason Kunesh come to visit and meet with us. So thank you so much for being here, all of you.